Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Alison Miller, the CEO here at On the Line. And welcome to you all as we celebrate International Men's Day via our first international Google Hangout at On the Line. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So why are we supporting International Men's Day? And today is International Men's Day, and On the Line is proud to deliver MensLine, Australia's only, in fact, the world's only dedicated professional support service for men, operating 24/7, 365 days of the year via telephone, online and video counselling. We are the safe pair of hands for men, and they can rely upon us any time of day, regardless of geography and circumstance. Through MensLine, we have worked with hundreds of thousands of men over the years, and we know for a fact that there are very few resources and supports for men. They are so scarce, not just in Australia, but worldwide. And we know that there is a long way to go in ensuring that additional support is provided to assist men to be mentally and emotionally healthy, and to enable them to participate in a positive way with their families, their workplace, and in their communities. We know that our work through MensLine has literally saved thousands of lives, and it helps men maintain personal stability when they are at their most vulnerable. To mark the occasion today, we are hosting the Top Blokes Talk Google Hangout, featuring author and producer Josh Rivedal and On the Line's Randall Newton-John. Josh and Randall will discuss men's mental health and suicide prevention. Josh will share his journey, how he struggled with his own depression, and the positive life he now leads helping others. And now I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Josh. Josh moved from New Jersey to New York State at the age of 21 to tackle the world of fame, fortune, and the Broadway stage. 8 years later, and through a series of remarkable life events, a bad economy, and a mixture of collegiate and self-education, Josh reinvented himself as an international public speaker, author, playwright, theatre producer, educator, marketing consultant, and arts entrepreneur. As a public speaker, his primary focus is on suicide prevention, speeches and seminars on his experiences as a survivor of loss, an attempt survivor, and youth suicide prevention. Often, but not always, paired with his one-man show, According to Josh. Josh has recently released an Australian edition of his book, The Gospel According to Josh, a 28-year Gentile Bar Mitzvah. And Josh is generously donating 25% of the proceeds from the sale of this book to MensLine Australia. And for anybody out there that's interested, please contact ontheline.org.au. This book is a great story about Josh's personal journey, and it demonstrates how he has overcome considerable obstacles and loss in the past, and how he now works to raise awareness about suicide prevention across the globe. We are incredibly appreciative of the fact that Josh is able to join us today at this Google Hangout. I'm also delighted to introduce our Executive General Manager of Operations here at On the Line, Randall Newton-John, who is incredibly experienced and knowledgeable in all aspects of men's issues and men's services, as well as suicide prevention. The way the session will work is that Josh and Randall will discuss the issues facing men and suicide prevention. Great pleasure to hand you over to Josh and Randall. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the warm welcome. Aside from being someone who has nearly attempted suicide, I've lost my father in 2009 and my grandfather in 1966. And it's not just a U.S. issue, it's not just an Australian issue, it's an international issue, and we're all in this together. I'm going to dive in and I'm going to ask Randall some questions, and he's going to dive in and give me some answers, and I might dive in at the end and kind of give my 2 cents as well. You know, talking about suicide, what does it look like? What does symptoms and signs of suicide, what does that look like in guys?
The signs and symptoms, there isn't, I mean, I think your book demonstrates that there isn't, everyone is unique, and but there are probably some general things you can say about how men are led or may feel that they're suicidal. One of the things that men tend to do is they tend to isolate themselves. When they're going through stress, any sort of stress, men try to work it out themselves. Not all men, but a large number of men will try and work it out themselves, and at the time that they really need help, they'll withdraw and pull back into themselves. And by doing that, all those thoughts, those negative thoughts that they might be having are going round and round in their heads. They're trying to work it out, but it's not working. So some of the signs is they might be losing sleep, loss of appetite, not enjoying the things they once did. And I think some of those things that you talked about in your book, Josh, are there. And it's at some point, though, it tips over from being that what we might call depression or feeling low or feeling out of sorts, and it becomes thoughts about death, about ruminating about that I shouldn't be here. And I think one of the things that really is the tipping point is when men start to feel like they don't have a reason to live. There's no purpose anymore. There's a meaninglessness. And then it may then start to very seriously then turn into actually planning suicide, making preparations to end your life. And it's important to seek help at any point, but certainly if it's getting to the point where starting to plan ending your life, then it's important to seek help straight away.
That's a lot of what I was going through, isolating, not going out, losing sleep, thinking about death and dying. And yes, men and anyone should go seek help immediately. I get people ask me questions sometimes. They say, well, how sick do I have to be, or how bad do I have to feel? And the answer is, you don't even need a diagnosis to talk to anybody. Just go and get help. If you feel something is awry, go get help. There's no need to think twice. Randall, what is the number for MensLine?
The number for MensLine is 1300 78 9978, and you can also access our online services through our website. So the website is mensline.org.au. So just so people understand that MensLine does provide a suite of services. So we have obviously have our 24/7 telephone service. So that's what we call our open line. So that means men can call in at any time to talk about the issues. However, we also do have we have attached to that a callback service, so men can receive ongoing professional support with the same counsellor over a period of time, going more depth around the issues that might be facing. Through our website, you can access a web chat service. This has been particularly popular for younger men who have grown up in the online world and maybe not comfortable at using the telephone. So web chat, we're seeing a lot of the younger men using the web chat service. And then we have our video service 24/7. So that's obviously some people, they do want to see their counsellor, and it's very similar to seeing a face-to-face counsellor in real life, but it's done remotely. We obviously have our website, which has a lot of information, and on the website there's also a forum, so that men who are going through similar experiences, often around family and relationship issues, are talking to each other and supporting each other.
So grateful that those resources exist. What are some other ways that people can get help outside of the MensLine resource? You know, say you're a woman, or say that you're a young person, you know, or just you need to reach out to a friend. I mean, is there something that people can do sort of face-to-face before they even get to the point of a MensLine resource?
We do actually get women calling MensLine. They're usually calling about a man that they're concerned about, and we can help them, support them to get help for that man. But in terms of seeking support outside of MensLine, I mean, I think the important thing is that most men don't necessarily call a support service. They will reach out to their families and friends, and I think that's what you showed in your book, Josh, too, is that it's often those who are closest to us that we need to reach out to, because they know us well, and it gives us a lot of comfort in those hard times to talk to them. So that's often the first port of call. But not everybody feels comfortable about talking to someone close to them, especially when they're going through a really hard time. They may feel like they don't want to burden them, or it's too hard, they don't know what they're going to say. So then people will go, for people to go and see their doctor, see a psychologist, speak to any support service, including MensLine. The other sort of service that some people do find helpful are support groups, because going through a similar experience can be really, talking to people who have gone through a similar experience can be really helpful for some people. That's why our forum on MensLine works really well, because men can talk to other people and they know they're going to talk a similar language.
I think the key word is talking. I mean, that was certainly for me. I mean, before I actually spoke out, you know, the first person I called, and I didn't end up initially calling a crisis line, but I did call my mother, and thankfully she helped save my life in that moment. And it was the talking. The talking was something that was really a big relief. And it didn't just, you know, it wasn't like I stopped thinking about it then and there, but it gave me the space to consider other means and methods of help. And so I started talking to friends and to other family members, and then found the space to go to counseling and some therapy. So, you know, wherever guys are, it's important that you reach out and you talk. And if you're on the other side too, just important that you listen. I think the best thing to do for someone is to listen to them, other than referring them to a MensLine or something, you know, professional help. Just sitting there and being with someone and letting them know that you care about them, and letting them spill the beans, letting them talk. Don't interrupt, just let them, just be with them. That is one of the best things you can do, and that was for me. In terms of dispelling myths, can you do that for us? I mean, is there anything that sort of sticks out in your mind at the moment that we can say, nope, that's not what happens, this is what really happens instead?
I think one of the things that really stops people from seeking help is that if they think that they're having suicidal thoughts, that there's something fundamentally wrong with them, that there's something so wrong that they couldn't possibly. It's a shame. It's shameful, and that's not the case. Any of us under the wrong circumstances could have suicidal thoughts, and it's probably true to say that people listening today, some of them have. It's not uncommon. Going through a period of extreme crisis, it's certainly can be on people's minds. So the first thing to understand is that, unfortunately, it is something that anyone can face, and that because of that, it's something that it's not shameful. You need to talk about it. The other thing is that, and goes along a little alongside this, is that there is also a bit of a myth that you have to be in the depths of depression to end your life, and it's not always the case. They do know that the research shows that most people, yes, they are in a form of depression, but this is particularly for men, that they can, suicide can result out of an impulsive act. It comes out of a crisis moment. Men particularly, we see that I was a counsellor on the lines for about 3 years, and it was really evident that when it comes to a crisis, particularly around separation, particularly around the feeling that they're going to lose their family, men can feel as if everything is lost, that there is nothing left. And at that moment, in that crisis moment, it may not be a depression, it may be what one might call a desperation or a sense of hopelessness, that they will then act impulsively and take their life. So it's also important to realise that you may not necessarily, people suicidal may not necessarily be demonstrating all the typical signs of depression, and we need to be vigilant when people are going through crisis to support them. When it comes to those who are supporting suicide, there's often a belief that if the person is talking about suicide, that they're fine. They've come to a point where they realise that they're not going to take their life. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes people will talk about suicide and complete suicide. So we need to take any mention of suicide absolutely seriously, and we need to ask them, you know, how they're going, and really seek support, both for ourselves in terms of supporting them, but also for them. So take every mention of suicide seriously.
That's absolutely important. Even younger men, you think, you know, they're talking about it might be a cry for help, but it's so important just to understand that even maybe it is a cry for help on a certain level, but there's something underneath. Or sorry, a cry for attention, but there's something underneath that's important to sort of get to the root of. And so it's always important to take seriously someone talking about suicide. On the other hand, and it's sort of something you sort of sparked in my mind, Randall, and that is that that asking someone about suicide isn't going to make them do it, and that's a very common misconception that I come across, and people are afraid to talk about it if they're sitting with somebody and that somebody might be in crisis. You know, they might be nervous or afraid to ask the question because they're afraid that it's going to put the idea in their mind and that the person's going to do it, and that's far from the case. Asking someone about suicide is not going to make them do it. In my case, it certainly wasn't. My mother asked me about suicide. She asked me if I was if I was thinking about taking my life, and I responded yes. And it was certainly a relief to respond yes, because no one had ever asked me that before while I was going through this crisis, and she took the time to get through that fear and to ask me about how I was doing and what was going on in my life. And so really what that was, it was a gauge and it was a meter to see how strongly I was thinking about it, if I was thinking about it at all. And I think that's important for everyone to know. And the other thing is it shows that you're a friend to the person who's in crisis because you actually care. Now sometimes the person on the other hand is not going to respond in a friendly manner. But, you know, I'd rather have an angry friend than a friend who's not here anymore because I didn't ask the question. So it's important to ask the question if you suspect, if you think there's something going on, the person's in crisis and they need some help. I'm gonna put some resources up on the screen. MensLine is up there. These are just a few things that are in Australia, some helplines and some resources. And these are on my website at gospeljosh.com/MensLine Australia. What does recovery look like? What does it look like coming out of that black hole?
There isn't one way. I think it's, and again, Josh, your book is really a testament to this is a journey which is unique for every person. It's going to take work. I think that's not, if you've come to a place in your life where you're feeling suicidal, it's not necessarily going to be an easy journey back, and it's not necessarily going to be a straight line upwards. You'll have good days and you'll have bad days, and it's really important to know that just because you're having a bad day doesn't mean to say that you've lost all the gains that you've made. One of the things that's really important is I spoke about this before, is about finding that reason to live. And when I was a counsellor on the lines, we used to always say that if one of the men on the lines had a child, we had children, that it was a fantastic anchoring point, a reason to live. And I'd often talk to that guy, and I'd ask him, well, where are your children in this? What does this mean? What does it mean for you? And they'd often say, well, the reason I'm calling you is because of my children, and I don't want to do it for them. Now, I'm not saying, I mean, obviously in your case, Josh, that wasn't the case, but there are, in terms of your father, but there are, it's about finding the anchor point. It's about finding what's the reason to live. For other people, it's about getting angry, not necessarily at other people, but angry at wanting to make a difference. What can I do? What's going to get me up in the morning? What's going to make me change the world? It might be the thing that's led me to feeling, part of the triggers that led me to feel this way, or it might be something that you think is unjust or you think needs to be changed. If you've got a reason to live, if you've got a purpose in life, it's very hard to then say, I want to leave it all behind, and to hold on to that anchor, and to do whatever you can to remind yourself of what that reason is.
That speaks so much for me and what I went through. It does look different for different people, the recovery, and it does take work. It took me, I would say, 9 months to feel normal again. I wasn't, suicidal towards the end of that 9 months. It was really, the first 2 months. But man, it took work, but it wasn't drudgery. It was interesting and intriguing, and a lot of the things that I put in place are things that I still do in my life, that don't feel like work. They're just, things to support a healthy and happy and productive and fulfilled life. And even before I got to that place, I did have to find an anchor point. And there was a couple of them, and one of them there was a little bit of that guilt, and that's okay, you know. I mean, I would never guilt someone myself, but if I feel that, that's okay. I can't let my brother and sister lose their brother like they lost their father. That's just, it's not fair. And then I thought there was other adventures to have, and so that was interesting. And then I thought that I could have sort of, there might be something left for me. So I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to feel the way that I felt. I didn't want to be in that emotional pain. And so coming out of that, I had to have the anchor point. It was helping other people and doing stuff like what we're doing right now and talking about this. And so I felt a sense of purpose and that I could help other people. And so that became a huge anchor point. And then, you know, I was able to talk to friends and the family. I did a little spirituality, and I don't really like to talk a lot about that because it's very personal and different people do different things. The creativity was important, you know, and that was something that, for me, it was writing. And it was never intended to be produced. It was something that I needed to map out my brain and my thoughts and get it down on paper. But for other people, they might make a macaroni necklace, they might do a tap dance, and that is totally cool. Whatever gets you through and whatever makes you feel good and feel better. You know, exercising, eating right, and it's putting little pieces, you know, of the puzzle in place and just talking. Something that I wasn't used to doing. I just want to issue 2 quick closing challenges. And then we're going to open it back up to Allison, who has some questions, and I think she's going to throw them at Randall and I. Going through what I went through, I was in a deep, dark depression in 2011. Get help immediately. Nip it in the bud before it can become prolonged depression, suicidal thoughts. It doesn't even have to be a crisis situation. Just get help and talk to somebody, because talking to somebody is going to get your brain to start thinking in a different way. If I didn't get help the day I got help, there's a good chance I might not be here right now. Every day is a gift. And it's tremendous, and I'm grateful for it. And I never wanted to die. I just didn't want to feel the way I felt anymore. And so it's possible it does get better, and there's hope. And then the second piece is, and this goes for everybody, no matter who you are, be a friend to those in need. Give a little bit extra, because the extra that you could be that you give is just that little piece that could save a life, or could have the butterfly effect in saving a life down the road. So just a quick thanks to Randall for just, you know, the tremendous answers to the questions that I had. And so I do want to throw it back to Allison.
Thanks for that, Josh. And yes, we do have a few questions actually, so thanks everybody for contributing. First question is actually to both of you. What is the best way to re-engage with a friend who has withdrawn?
Yeah, well, when a friend is withdrawn, it can be very difficult because you can feel as if what you shared before is gone. You don't have you don't know quite what to say. You don't know whether you should mention suicide or mention what they've been through. One of the things that I think we talk about when we talk about working with men in particular is this side-by-side approach. I often say that when men are working together, they're sort of side-by-side looking out at an issue. And one of the ways to re-engage is simply to be there and not necessarily have to feel immediately that you have to say anything. Or it can be being in the space and allowing that time for something to come through. Now, there might be a moment or a period of time of awkwardness and a feeling as if, this is just a really difficult time, but that will be momentary. You just got to work through that, and then, in its own time, then the conversation can come. You don't have to leap into it, but the most important is that you're there, and that might mean doing something non-verbally. It might mean, even just watching television together. And then out of that, something can come.
You know, I think that's one of the best things is just kind of being with a friend, being with a guy, just being with somebody as they're going through a crisis and not having to say a whole lot. I think we as people, not just guys, but we as people, we're fixers, and we want to fix. You know, we see somebody who we love, who's interesting to us, and we want to help them. You know, and so we want to dive in and be there with some advice. But the issue is on that end is that, you know, I fix things differently than you fix things, then she fixes things, and so on. And so, the way my brain works is going to be different. And so if you give me that piece of advice that doesn't work for me, I'm going to shut down if I'm in crisis, because I'm going to think, well, you don't understand me, you don't get it. And so it's important not to try to fix it, but just to be there with somebody. And that's a tremendous gift you can give to somebody. And I mean, guys, what do? We do a lot of nonverbal things together. We fix the car, we change the oil, we stand by the grill and grunt over the meat that we're grilling. There's lots of things we can do. I'm kind of being silly, of course, but there's a lot, and it's in women too, children too, elderly too. It doesn't matter. I think just being there with somebody is a great way to engage and re-engage with somebody.
Thanks, Josh. Another question for Randall. Today we've focused on men's mental health and suicide prevention issues. What are some of the other issues that men seek support for, Randall, on MensLine?
MensLine has been set as a specialist in family and relationship concerns, and a lot of the issues that we are talking about are connected back to family and relationship. Those things, though, it's never one thing. Let's take this example. A man separates from his wife, and then he goes through a mental health crisis. He then moves into some sort of an addiction problem that then leads to him potentially losing his job, going into financial difficulties, and it becomes this whole web of a knot of issues, and it's very hard to know where one thing begins and another thing ends. And so what we do is to look at what's in the moment, what can be done in the here and now, how can we start to take those small steps to begin to make those changes. And it may be at the core, it might be with the relationship, but it might be that that's all too difficult, and it might be just simply about being able to literally just get up in the morning and have something to eat, something as simple as that. And then from those small steps you can begin to face some of the bigger issues. So we do deal with a whole range of issues. They often are connected, and when it comes to suicide, they very often are connected to separation and the loss of a loved one in one form or another. But we deal with the whole gamut.
Actually, this is a great question. Is it possible that some people need quiet time to resolve their problems as well?
Yes. So the quiet time is about being quiet and stilling your mind to be able to pick apart some of those thoughts and be able to understand what's going through. If you can't get there, if it's getting too noisy inside your head, that's the time maybe to get some help and to say, how can I do this? How can I get there? Get to this quiet space. But absolutely, we need to work this ourselves, and getting inside is critical.
Another question we have is it right to protect those who have had their suicidal thoughts from their triggers? That is, to avoid the situation or the circumstance.
I know some people who have thought about suicide and have nearly taken their life. And on one hand, some of them, they're okay with being on something like a crisis line and talking to people. They go through certain mental health checks and things like that. And there's other folks who are not good, being on a crisis line or a helpline and something of that nature. So I think it's certainly case to case. Be respectful of that. And it's also sort of know thyself, and to sort of start to understand your body and what your triggers are, and to be very vocal about what those triggers are to the people around you.
Yes, well, I think it's very difficult to protect someone from their own triggers, especially when those triggers are often all around them. Like, take the example of a man who has separated from his family. That's every time he opens his eyes, he'll look around and see that they're not around. It's impossible to protect him from that. So there's a bit of illusion to try to protect things. However, I would say that there is a difference between this right at the critical end, and that's more about access to means of completing suicide. When somebody is at the point where they could access the means to complete suicide, we need to be able to talk to them about removing themselves where possible from those means, because that's the point where if they're at that level where they're thinking about that, that we don't want them acting impulsively doing that. So where possible, removing people from their triggers of the actual means of completing suicide, but protecting them from the actual distress, very difficult to do. And I would suggest that there's a saying, and it might, I don't know whether it's right for this, but if you can, anything that you go through can make you stronger.
Another question is, and Randall, you've talked quite a bit about families and those that are separated. What about, this is a question, and actually it's quite a relevant one for myself, because certainly for me, my experience when I was suicidal was I had nobody in my life. It was very hopeless, very helpless, and I felt I'd lost the anchor of my family many years before. So where do you help people find the anchor points when they don't have families? What do you get them to hold on to when they think they've got nothing to hold on to, if that makes sense?
I think one of the main anchor points that people have when you think about families is something bigger than themselves. Something that's the reason to live. Come back to that reason to live. It's often about something that's bigger than you, something that you believe is that you link to. Now that can be different for every people. I think Josh touched on this. I think spirituality is a very important thing, because that's about something bigger than ourselves. It can be the general community that you live in. Some people, it's as simple as their pet. I had a man talk to me about I couldn't do it because of my dog, and that's it's finding that part of you that connection with something more than you. Thanks,
Randall. Josh, this is one for you. I loved what you said about being given the gift of life back, and that's very much how I look upon my life too, as every day is a gift now. But what was there a turning point for you, or a moment when you realised that you valued your life again, and that you knew the difficult emotions wouldn't last? Was there a trigger for you when you thought, yes, I can now move on?
I was nearing an actual attempt. I nearly made an attempt, and I was so close. And in that moment, there was a part of me that said, you don't really want to die. You just don't want to feel like this anymore. And there was just a little bit of logic there. And then I needed more to support that logic. I needed to call my mom. I needed to speak out and to reach out and to take risks as I saw them at the time, which, they weren't risks at all. They were things I needed to do. But I think for me, it was certainly this moment near an attempt where I realized I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to feel like that anymore. And then going forward, the more that I saw that people felt that I was worth something, then that seed was sort of planted in myself as well. And then as I started to realize I could help other people, then I had a purpose. Then I mattered. Then I had responsibility for somebody outside myself, something I didn't have for a very long time. Just kind of paying attention to my acting career for a long time, and there was never anything really beyond that. And as soon as I started realizing I can help people with suicide and depression and anything else, really, it was like I have a purpose. And so it was sort of not linear, but there was sort of a progression of some steps.
Fantastic. Thanks, Josh. And this is the last question that I have from the audience in the room. And Josh, again, it's for you. Why did you decide to launch your book in Australia? And what in particular made you want to support MensLine?
We don't have sort of a dedicated mail service in the United States. And I figured, you know what? It's not just a U.S. issue. It's not just a Rivedal issue. My last name, in case you forgot. It's beyond that. I'm a citizen of the world. you know, and so I really wanted to sort of step out of my own comfort zone and take a risk and say, hey, you know, this book did well in the U.S. Let's see what we can do in other places. So there was that on top of it. But the most important thing was that this book has been helping people, and that's the important thing for me. There's no other reason to write the book, and then to be able to at the same time support an organization who's doing things that I wish my father and my grandfather took his life, like I mentioned, in the 60s, and so like these guys needed, and like I needed, and eventually I found, but those guys didn't, like Dad and Granddad. And so, you know, I need to support, you know, wherever I can and whatever I do. And so I think MensLine is doing some tremendous work, and you can support MensLine in a lot of different ways. You go to their website, and if it's a retweet, great. If it's a couple of dollars, even better. Or if it's just with sort of supporting the work they do by talking to another friend and things like that. But I kind of want to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm doing this book launch with MensLine, and because I just believe in the work.
I do have one more question if we've got time, and Randall, it's for yourself, and I think it's a very important question actually. And Randall, that is the role that other professionals play with regards to supporting men. We were focused on MensLine today, but you know, what about the other roles that professionals play? And crucially as well, Randall, could you speak a few minutes on medication as well? Because particularly for people that are listening in today, what role do they play in that suite of support, Randall?
Well, all professionals have a responsibility in suicide prevention. Not all professionals necessarily feel comfortable or have the training in suicide prevention. But it doesn't necessarily mean need a high degree of training to ask the question whether their client, or whatever form of professional support that they're providing, whether their client is feeling suicidal. That sometimes this is, you know, particularly important for those primary health providers, you know, general practitioners, or those who are seeing clients in a more general setting. You know, if their clients are displaying signs of distress or mentioning issues that you know could be leading towards suicide, to ask the question and then to support them there and then, and to seek specialist support if required. In terms of medication, obviously medication is one of the suite of supports, if you like, that people going through depression and use to help them to get through the difficult times. Medication will, you know, when it's the correct medication and when it's properly administered and supported with a professional, will help a person to change the brain chemistry so it's able to cope better. Obviously, it doesn't. It's something you still need to work through the issues behind that, and that's something that obviously you need to discuss with your professional in terms of how you manage both utilising the medication, but also undertaking psychological work or the work to resolve the underlying issues.
Thanks, Randall. Anything else that either of you guys would like to say?
Men, you know, we know that in Australia, 75% of the suicides, the committed suicides, are men, and this is an issue around men. It's around suicide, but it also is a particular issue around men and masculinity, and something that we need to tackle. And we also know that this kind of pattern is replicated throughout the world. So it's fantastic to have this opportunity to talk on International Men's Day about this unique connection between suicide and men, and how we can help to assist men, and we can work to resolve this issue on an international level. Thanks
very much to both of you, Josh and Randall, for I think what we'd all agree here has been a wonderful Google Hangout.